Yes, an amendment will be discussed today in the House of Lords, which asks for male prisoners to not be housed in women's prisons. One of the passionate speakers on this subject is Dr. Kate Coleman, director of Keep Britain Prisons Single Sex.
Absolutely, and thank you very, very much for taking the time to join us. What must be said was relatively short notice, Kate, so thank you, we do appreciate it. Look, how are you first and foremost? And please, can you just kind of whiz our viewers through what's really going on here, what's happening?
Right, so the situation with women's prisons in England and Wales through the MOJ policies is that some male prisoners, if they identify as transgender, so if they identify as female, provided that they meet certain criteria, they will be held in the female prison estate. This can include males who've been convicted of violent offences against women and girls, sexual offences against women and girls, and those who have intact male genitalia. We believe that this is really just quite an egregious use of the female prison estate and is using women either as human shields for their safety or to validate identity. And that's what the amendment today seeks to change. That if the law constrains the Ministry of Justice in making decisions to keep women in prison safe, then it's the law that has to change.
Coleman, I mean, would you say that prisons should be single-sex in all circumstances? I guess critics might say that transgender women who have had surgery or who have got the gender recognition certificate are also vulnerable, and they should be in the prisons that correspond to the gender that they identify, and that would be putting them in female prisons.
Right. Well, yes, we do believe that prisons should be strictly single sex. And I think we have to look at what is this about? Is this about safety or is this about validation of identity? Because the amendment that's being discussed this evening specifies that a third space should be made available for those minority of transgender male prisoners who identify as women and who cannot reasonably be kept safe in the male estate. We know from the Ministry of Justice data that the overwhelming majority of them are kept safe in the male estate. It's only a very small number who the risk assessment processes, the MOJ believe, should be held with women. But we don't think that that's really the right situation at all, because if it's about safety, if it's about the safety of this vulnerable group of male prisoners, then they shouldn't be housed with women. They can be kept safe separately. You know, this is about sex. This is about the importance of sex for safeguarding, for risk assessment. It's not an issue of minority gender rights. You know, the gender recognition certificate, it provides that somebody can have their acquired gender legally recognised. It's not changing sex. It's not an intention to replace sex with gender, and it's not an intention to undermine the possibility of sex-based rights for women. And I think it would be an absolutely extraordinary situation if we have to interpret the Equality Act, which provides for the possibility of single-sex spaces for females, for women and for girls. If we have to explain that, we have to interpret that to render single-sex spaces for females absolutely impossible. If there's always some group of male prisoners for female prisons or other males who identify as transgender who have to be admitted to single-sex spaces for women, I just find that extraordinary.
I think many people will echo your sentiments very strongly, but have you got any specific examples or evidence of when this has actually caused uncomfortability or unsafety for women or females within female prisons, the law as it stands right now?
Yes, well, we're in contact with former female offenders and they do report a huge amount of unease, disquiet. They're forced to refer to these males who they correctly identify as male as female, use female pronouns. If they misgender, they can receive a punishment, whether that's loss of privileges or segregation. They report sexualized behaviour from these prisoners, intimidating behaviour, threatening behaviour. You mentioned prisoners with a gender recognition certificate. But I think we need to make clear here that there's absolutely no requirement to undergo any surgical alteration to your body or any hormonal treatment in order to obtain that gender recognition certificate.
Yeah, and that's the point, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
We know of violence against offenders who've gone on to obtain a gender recognition certificate in prison, have then been transferred to the female estate.
Exactly.
Completely impact male genitalia, which they've then been exposing to women. And I feel for prison officers, because the reports that we've had is that they feel absolutely constrained by policy. They can't complain. They can't put into effect the normal processes which they would were an incident to occur with another prisoner.
But my understanding as well of this situation would be that currently if you had a male sex offender and they went to prison, so they went through court, presumably those court proceedings would be recorded in the local, or if it's bad enough, national press, and then they go into a prison, they then potentially decide that they want to change gender, whether there's any kind of surgical element to that or medical, chemical elements to that or not. They can then maybe take a different name, and one would imagine they would take a different name, right? And then get moved into a female prison. And actually, if they potentially came out of there, isn't that potentially a way around them being held to account for the rest of their lives for those things, really? Because they've basically given themselves a different identity after being convicted of a very heinous crime. And they could move in next door to you, you could Google their name and nothing would come up.
Well, I mean, you've got two issues here. When you get a gender recognition certificate, if you're this male sex offender that you've just been describing, you will then, for the rest of your life, be risk assessed as if you are a woman, and only using the risk assessment tools that are in place for females. So that means there's one very important risk assessment tool which was developed specifically for adult male sex offenders, and it now cannot be used on this person because they have to be risk assessed as if they are a female. And that's for the rest of their life. That's for parole. That's for probation. That's going forwards in the prison system should they commit a further offence and be imprisoned. And I think that is an absolutely massive safeguarding loophole which has been created with absolutely no evidence that if you receive a gender recognition certificate, suddenly the level of risk you pose plummets to that posed by females.
And finally, Dr. Coleman, just very quickly, because we don't have a lot of time. I mean, you've been doing some very courageous and passionate work on this, but has there been any support for you, whether that's in Parliament or in government, for the changes that you're hoping to get forward?
Well, we do have support in Parliament. We have support across both parties and across all parties and across both houses. And I think you'll see a selection of the peers who are supportive of our position, our campaign, speaking up tonight. And I'm very much looking forward to that debate. Within Parliament, within government, we do also have support. We know that these issues, even if the amendment today falls, we know that these issues are being paid close attention to by government.
All right. Look, Kate, thank you very much. And again, thank you for coming on at very, very short notice. And look, we'll have to have you back on soon. Good luck with everything going forward. You certainly got my full support here, that's for sure. Dr. Kate Coleman, Director of Keep Prisons Single Sex.